What do you guys think of when I say the word Mandalorian? Is it something like this? Or perhaps it's something like this. Or this. Others might be more familiar with the Legends version of the Mandalorians. It's a history full of glorious crusades, crushing your enemies, seeing them driven before you, and of course the lamentation of their women. This is what's best in life for a Mandalorian, or at least that's what a good percentage of Mandalorian society thinks. And let's be honest, there's something very raw and primal and enjoyable about just how crazy and over the top the Mandalorians are. They're not just covered from head to toe in plate armor, they also have attached on their body flamethrowers, jetpacks, rocket launchers, and an ungodly amount of different types of projectiles. So much so that I'm surprised that when a Mandalorian warrior dies, he or she doesn't just blow up like one giant Beskar fragmentation grenade. The act of indulging in excessive violence is deeply rooted in our primal psyche. It's entertaining and it's fun. Especially for those of us who aren't actually Mandalorians and just like to watch their battles as if they were some kind of over-the-top spectator sport. But a quick look at the story of the Mandalorian people shows us a history that is rife with consequences because of their aggressive nature. In Legends, we have the disastrous defeat of the Mandalorian Crusades at the Battle of Malachor V in 3960 BBY. The fallen Jedi Revan deployed a mass shadow generator and pulled most of the Mandalorian fleet and a good portion of the Republic fleet into the planet. It only just fractured the planet's core and made a permanent wound in the Force, no big deal. Then in 738 BBY, during the so-called Golden Era of the Republic, just a few hundred years after the Ruusan Reformation, which demilitarized the galaxy, the Republic demilitarized the Mandalorians in a terrible event known as the Mandalorian Excision. A massive Republic and Jedi fleet launched a controversial preemptive strike on the Mandalorians simply because they feared their economic and military growth. The surface of the planet was basically rendered barren after that. Now, I mentioned these two Legends events because in canon, while these events do exist, there's not a lot of specific detail about them. Hopefully one day the lore will catch up. These are the consequences of being a warrior race, especially one that is perceived the way the Mandalorians are. That second time with the whole Excision thing totally wasn't their fault. And of course, we still haven't gotten to the Death Watch taking over Mandalore, and then Maul and his criminal syndicate taking over the planet, or the Republic invasion, which then turned into the Imperial occupation, which then turned into a bloody civil war, which eventually led to the Great Purge of Mandalore. I mean, how do you even purge a people who had multiple civil wars and excision, multiple genocides? I mean, what else is there left to purge at this point? Anyway, before we continue, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video, Ownersaber.com, the only lightsaber manufacturer out there that guarantees no Jedi younglings were hurt during the manufacturing process. And for the rest of July, the entire store is going to be 30% off with free shipping. Plus now, Ownersaber.com is offering the option to engrave their Wraith Bearer hilt with up to 10 words. All you have to do is add the Wraith Bearer special bundle into your cart and then type in the notes section during checkout what you want to be written on the saber hilt. Remember guys, you have to select the special bundle. If you just select the Wraith Bearer from the Padawan saber category, you will not get the engraving. I'll put all the details in the description section down below. Also guys, if you want an additional $15 off, feel free to use my promo code EWOK, that's all caps. Thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. Throughout human history, factions have risen and fallen. Great people have been bowed by technological advances or disease and military defeat. For most factions, when you lose your nation, that spells doom for the future of your people. Once scattered and turned into refugees, within a few generations, their way of life, their language, their traditions all fade away and are absorbed by other more powerful cultures. But some cultures prove to be resilient even when their nations are destroyed, when they're scattered across the planet and turned into a diaspora. And that's because there's certain things about their culture that just makes them more resilient and hardy to this type of event. Some cultures are not built for prosperity or moments of stability or peace. Some are built to survive chaos. We often view culture as something that belongs in the realm of art, but I like to think of culture as a form of guidance or even social technology, perhaps. Culture is something that has developed over many generations. It is a selective process where humans create social adaptations to the challenges they face, whether it's a way to adapt to certain environments or certain political and social realities. Take the Jewish people, for instance. They are perhaps the most persecuted group of human beings in our history, and that's perhaps why they have a very tight-knit community. There are several religious and social organizations in the Jewish community that takes care of their most vulnerable members. The Jewish people also put great importance on holidays like Pesach or Passover, where they retell the story of their persecution during ancient Egyptian times. And because they've been a diaspora for most of their history, Jewish families place an importance on education and sound financial practices in order to give themselves leverage and mobility in case another larger power decides to use them as scapegoats for their own inadequacies in leadership. And despite the rise of anti-Semitism on both the extreme left and extreme right of the political spectrum, I've no doubt that these very resilient people will continue to survive. I mean, they've outlasted many of their previous enemies, whether it's the Roman Empire, the Egyptian pharaohs, the Babylonians, the Spanish Inquisition, the Third Reich, all the various Arab nations that tried to destroy Israel the second it was formed. So how about Mandalorian culture then? They clearly don't have as deep or complex of a culture. Most of their traditions and cultures surround warfare, which in itself is problematic. So what has assured the survival of this relatively small group of warriors who continue to poke and prod much larger, more powerful factions for no other reason than they like fighting? Well, it's definitely not the Darksaber, the symbol of the Mandalorian throne, nor is it Mandalore's mask from Legends. It's actually a lot more common, and actually most Mandalorian families have a few of these at home, and it is a full suit of Mandalorian armor. You see, we often think of the Mandalorians as an aggressive warrior species who always succeed on the battlefield. What we really need to do is separate the sensationalized version of the Mandalorians we see in all the films and TV shows from what the Mandalorians actually were. For most of their history, the Mandalorians have been refugees and nomads. They've punctuated by short periods of time when they have gathered enough resources and manpower to crusade, which ultimately fails. And this tradition of catastrophe dates right back to their founding. The Twang, who were the precursors of the Mandalorians in Legends, originally hailed from the world of Neutron, which is also known as Coruscant today. They got involved in a battle with the much more numerous Zell who lived on the planet and were eventually driven off the world to what is now known as Mandalore. I guess you could say the Mandalorians have always picked fights with enemies that they had no chance at defeating. And so it kind of makes sense that the most important cultural item in Mandalorian culture is their Beskar'gram. Beskar, or Mandalorian iron, is one of the toughest and most durable metals in the galaxy. When properly turned into a workable alloy, a thin sheet of Beskar could stop most handheld blasters and even lightsaber strikes. It was a wonder metal and allowed a Mandalorian, in theory, to take unlimited hits from blaster fire. The only problem was staying conscious from all that concussive force. And while the Mandalorians loved their weapons,
weapons are part of my religion.
There's never really been an official Mandalorian weapon that has been widely adopted by the people, which should say a lot about them. I mean, the Jedi have their lightsabers and they're pretty pacifist. Americans, they have their ARs, dolphins, their death lasers. Now, you did have the Darksaber, but as we've argued in previous videos, this symbol of power has caused nothing but hardship and sorrow for the Mandalorian people. And that is because it was never created with the intent of being the symbol of leadership for the people. It was simply a weapon used by the Jedi Mandalorian hero Tar Vizsla, and it was elevated by members of his house later on in an effort to give more political legitimacy during their attempt to grab the Mandalorian throne. The Vizslas were the ones who created this stupid and perverted rule that the leadership of all Mandalorians could only be determined through trial by combat. It was a completely irrational way to select a leader and led to warriors and brutes taking the throne more often than people with actual experience and skills to rule an entire planet. But through all the setbacks and disasters, the Mandalorians were lucky that their Beskar armor always held through all that nonsense. You know, weapons can be discarded, they can be destroyed, they can be seen as tools. But suits of Beskar armor were far more valuable and nearly indestructible. They would usually only be passed down from one family member to another, and losing a suit of armor was a great shame for the entire family.
This armor has been in my family for 3 generations.
The armor was given to my father, Jango.
These suits of armor were part art, part protection, and part history. Each mark or score on a suit of Beskar signifies an extremely powerful blow, a reminder of the many great enemies these people have faced. This act of passing Beskar to new family members is a way to teach the next generation about the sacrifices of the previous generations. It also reminds us of the uncomfortable truth that most Mandalorians don't die from old age. The Beskar armor is also a poignant reminder that a Mandalorian warrior's most important duty is to actually protect and not attack. Mandalorian armor is designed to give these warriors something that most soldiers never get during a battlefield, and that is time to think rationally and adjust tactics. By having an indestructible suit of armor on your body in a gunfight, it really does give you a lot less stress and allows you to be more clear-headed on how you act. The new Mandalorians who tried to abolish the Mandalorian armor and warrior-like culture had it all wrong. Mandalorians, because of who they are and their martial tendencies, will always face external threats. And so, completely abolishing that martial history and getting rid of the military just left the Mandalorians open to attack from all sides. On the other hand, the Death Watch were wrong as well. Mandalorian society cannot be ruled by bullies who are just physically the strongest or best at fighting. And that is because a warrior's mind is his most potent power, not his reflexes, nor is it his strength. Plus, no matter how well prepared you are for conflict, diplomacy almost always leads to better outcomes and should be pursued first. If only the Mandalorians had the foresight to really understand their ancestors and who they were as a people. The problem is, whenever positive developments appeared in their culture, it was often replaced by more extreme and emotional leaders who didn't really have the Mandalorians' best intention at heart. I think this is why you see organizations like Children of the Watch exist. It makes sense that their leader, like in ancient times, is an armorer, a wise and experienced individual who knows the secrets of forging Beskar into formidable suits of armor. The entire tribe exists to protect not only their future, the foundlings, but also the wisdom of their past through the armorer. It wasn't just the armorer's combat abilities that allowed her to survive the destruction of the Navarro hideout by the Imperial Remnant. So guys, remember, when all fails, when the political system collapses, when modern technology is no longer useful, when the gods themselves are silent, you can always fall back on human culture. It is a guidebook, it is a collective experience of several generations trying to figure out ways how to deal with living life. So there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. My name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy,